As you know, this season of 12 Geniuses is Futurist Fridays, talking with 12 futurists. And I would love to have you just paint a picture for what the future looks like in 2053.
One of the things we futurists learn to do is uh, not to have singular predictions, to have scenarios, because it's so hard to make a prediction at that um, distance because of the inherent stochastic nature of our culture. And I think we can do better at maybe having a set of kind of like it's like a fence that goes around an area, and you were saying anything outside the fence is basically like impossible. Anything inside the fence is like plausible and could happen. And so we're gonna make some posts on the corners of this possibility space, knowing that whatever happens has to happen within these boundaries. And while we can't predict exactly what will happen, we can not be surprised. That we'll rehearse all the boundaries, and that way we don't know exactly what, but we'll know what's plausible or possible, and we'll have kind of rehearsed the things that are possible. So one of the big questions um, underlying kind of making one of these scenarios is like, is it even possible for Moore's law to continue? Moore's law is this fundamental phenomena that we don't really know exactly why it happens, but for every year since computers have begun, um, or every 2 years, or every 18 months in between, they've doubled in power per dollar, or halving the cost. They become cheaper and cheaper for the same amount of work, or basically saying for the same amount of price, they do twice the work. And that's now become an assumption in our society, in our view of the future, that computers will be incredibly powerful for the same amount of money or the same amount of space, whatever. If that doesn't happen, um, we have a very different world. If you could imagine a world where you bought a computer and it was like it didn't get any better, or at the same price, like in 10 years from now, or 20 years, it's like that's a very different world. And there's an argument about whether or not you know computers could continue to get it to keep doubling in their power for the same price, because this idea of Moore's law, it's observational. There's no theoretical underpinning about why that should be. So so one scenario in the 50s is that we have stagnation of compute, that we don't have that this kind of stampede that we have slows down because we've reached the limits of what we can do with cramming little tiny transistors into a small space. Maybe it shifts to some other methods, and that's what the hope is right now, is that, well, there's biological computing, or there's quantum computing, and that kind of takes over. But so far that we don't have much, I mean, it hasn't. So anyway, so that's one scenario where, and then we can kind of imagine a world where maybe the rate of change slows down.
And what are the
Um,
implications of that?
right. So it might be that we have cultural change as a driver of novelty. So it's like it's not all about the text. It's about having weird lifestyles, or it's about uh, art using the same tools, but just sort of reimagining what we can do with it. So it could, in some ways, still be a very exciting place, but there would be a sense, and then you know um, there could be more equity in the world, because it wouldn't depend on all the computers basically the same price, and they're the same thing. There's really no advanced tech so much, um, and you're kind of you have access to the same tools. It's like, imagine if your cell phone still worked in 15 years from now or 20 years from now. It wasn't that much better. And so that would be kind of an interesting effect where maybe cultural innovelty became more paramount. And then so that's one axis, is this slowing of Moore's law. And then another one could be that we have, a drastically different world because of AI. The AI really is as significant as I think it is, and that it unrolls pretty fast, and that we have a world where there is ubiquitous embedded AI in everything. And there's two or three different ways that could go. Um, where you have this intensely technologically and everything accelerated. So maybe there is quantum computing discovered as well, and that becomes normal. And so this kind of very intensely AI saturated world with hundreds of different varieties, and that's a little bit more common, scenario. Um, maybe a third possibility is that we have it's a subgroup of the AI. So one version of that is again that it comes ubiquitous. It's in everything, but there could be something happens where um, the network effects of AI become predominant. And network effects is this idea that it's called the facts effect sometimes, which means that the more powerful a network becomes, the more attractive it is to new members or new devices or new developers. And the more they join, the more attractive it becomes. So you have this thing where suddenly you have a monopoly. You have a natural monopoly where one thing takes over. And so even though there are hundreds or maybe thousands of different varieties and species of AI, maybe there is one company, and that's the question, company, country, something that so you have this really hugely dominant. You have a dominance at the global level that we have not seen before. You have where this AI system is so powerful and so valuable that everybody wants to use it because it is so much better, and yet it really it concentrates the power in a way that we haven't even seen with social media. And so that's a world that would be very different because maybe it's China that does it. And that would be kind of a weird for us. Like, it's the most powerful AI in the world, and everybody wanted to, use it. Like, it was really cheap, but it was like a million, or no, it's like say 1,000 times better than anything else, and it was cheaper than anything else. And it's a service and utility that you can just send to you. You don't have to make it. That's a different world than we're used to geopolitically, all kinds of things. So that's that kind of the opposite of decentralization, where you have this even further concentration of it, is another possible scenario. And when we do scenarios, we always like to have four. Let me think of a fourth one. Um, the this version is where the crypto wins, and you actually do have a very decentralized version of the internet. You have incredibly decentralized finance model. You have this, and the consequence of that would be kind of a much more of a active underground, and dark web become endemic. And you have a world in which there is a little bit more of a reset to the local entities and decentralization. So it becomes a little harder for the big monopolistic dominant countries or companies to take place. And that's the Web3 that's the Web3 vision to reconstruct the infrastructure, to make it incredibly decentralized so that ownership is, or I should say monopolistic ownership, is really difficult to do. It's inherently hard. And that's a possibility that, in the end, crypto does work, Web3 does work, and it spreads. And so those are kind of four general backbones to the world, and then you can kind of play out some of the consequences of a day in life in those four.